we have the national expert on House redistricting, David Wasserman. David, welcome to the show, and I'm going to give you a fuller introduction in a moment. In this segment, we'll also be joined by Rachel Hinton, who's the Chicago Sun-Times political writer who's in Springfield. Hello, Rachel. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. Let me tell you, David Wasserman is someone I'm so excited about talking to because he is the national expert on redistricting. David is a senior editor for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, where he's responsible for analyzing the United States House races. But he also is a master at redistricting, so much so that David's Twitter is @redistrict. He is renowned as an election forecaster in calling races in the House and Senate. He is a contributor to NBC News. He writes analysis in the Cook Political Report. In the spring of 2019, David was a fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics, where he led a seminar. I would have loved to have been at this one, called Mapping Our Future, Forecasting Elections and Redistricting. David, you're a native of New Jersey and a graduate of the University of Virginia. Welcome to At the Virtual Table.
Hey, thanks, Lynn. And I would add that UChicago is probably the only place in America where I could get around 15 students to voluntarily show up to talk about gerrymandering for 2 hours on Monday afternoons. So I can't wait to get back.
Yeah, David, I know what you mean. I served at the Institute of Politics as a fellow as well, and those students are amazing. They live and breathe politics. It's a really fun place to teach.
I remember you were there.
So let me do a quick setup as we talk to the master of redistricting in a moment. Illinois is a little different from some other states because the Democrats control the process. When you talk about the concerns Democrats have about the elections being rigged by gerrymandering, in Illinois, we don't talk about it that way because it's the Democrats that control the remap. So here are just a few things to think about as we start our discussion. The Democrats in Springfield, who Rachel covers, make the maps, 1. 2, our population loss in reapportionment means Illinois is going to lose a seat. 3, the population loss is mainly downstate, and the official numbers just came out. So, David, can you put the importance of Illinois in the context of the Democrats holding the House? And then I want to go into a few finer details with you, and then I'll throw it back to Laura and Rachel.
Lynn, it's paramount. Democrats have a razor-thin margin in the House of 5 seats. Republicans only need to pick up 5 seats to make Kevin McCarthy the Speaker. And Republicans have far more power over the redistricting process nationally than Democrats. They control some pretty big states: Texas, Florida, North Carolina, all of which are gaining seats. Georgia, where Republicans could purge 1 or 2 Democrats from the delegation. So that really puts the burden on Democrats to counteract that somehow. Now, Democrats have been talking a good game about redistricting reform. They've been all about H.R. 1, but neither the Supreme Court nor Congress, especially the Senate, has taken action to curb this in time for essentially the cartographic Olympics that will take place over the next 8 months. Olympics might be generous. It's more like an arms race. And so Democrats are going to be looking to 2 big states that they control, and that's Illinois and New York.
So right now we have 18 members in Congress, 13 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Because of the downstate loss, you have map making software and you have maps, and everyone, if you look at David's Twitter @redistrict, and then you just add the word Illinois, you could see his hypothetical maps, which basically are what a lot of people in Illinois are working off of right now. So you have a scenario where even with the loss of our seat, you end up with 14 Democrats and 3 Republicans. So what happens in your map making that you're able to lose 2 Republican districts? Could you explain?
Well, first of all, just because Illinois is losing a seat and it's a blue state doesn't mean that's bad for Democrats. It actually creates some opportunities. When we looked at the census numbers last week when they came out, what we saw was that Cook County had far more people than population projections had anticipated, and that the downstate population losses were a little bit bigger than a lot of projections suggested. So that means that Democrats can efficiently pack Republicans into these overwhelmingly red districts downstate to try and create as many Democratic districts as possible. Now, traditionally, the tactic of Democrats in Illinois has been to pinwheel Chicago districts as far out as possible. That's why Robin Kelly's district goes all the way out to Kankakee County, and it could even add Grundy County this time. Talk about a culture clash between different ends of the same district. But look, Democrats have a lot of desire to keep Sherry Bustos' seat. They have
even though she's retiring.
Correct, especially because she's retiring. Keep in mind that they're going to have a hard time keeping that seat without her unless they really do something about that to make that district better.
You have a very interesting hypothesis in your software in map making, which is why when you look at David's maps and you're looking for definitions of gerrymandering, this kind of does fit the bill, because these are all very jigsaw puzzle-like shapes, which is Democrats will say this ain't the year to change the system. So you put Democrats, as you go around the state in your cartography, you give college towns to Democrats. They're seen as Democrat. So I think in the district now represented by Sherry, when you redesign it, you put Western Illinois University and Northern Illinois University in it, just as an example of what to do. But here's my other question for you. Under the Civil Rights Act, which we talked about a little earlier with Congressman Garcia, we have in Illinois, as we discussed, one district designed to yield a Hispanic member of Congress and 3 districts designed under the Civil Rights Act to have Black members. But with population shifts, when you designed your 3 Black majority districts, or rather districts to yield the election of a Black member of Congress, are these majority Black districts anymore? Or it says the population changed so much that it's just different? Could you explain?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, these maps that I've posted are not my ideas. These are reported maps based on my conversations with Illinois Democrats. And I can tell you, there is going to be some tension regarding minority representation among Democrats in Illinois. Now, it's going to be very difficult for Democrats to argue that one African-American majority seat should be eliminated to create a new Hispanic seat. That's just not going to fly, given the makeup of Democrats in the legislature. But in order to create 2 Hispanic majority seats without disrupting the 3 predominantly Black districts, they would have to stretch the south side of Chicago all the way out to Aurora, and they would have to stretch the north side of Chuy Garcia's district all the way out to Elgin. That disrupts Democrats' plans to maximize their seats in the suburbs. And that's why a lot of Democrats I speak with are staying true to the tradition of the earmuffs, to keep Hispanic voters together in one district that links the north and south sides.
So I don't know if you heard when I was asking Garcia about creating a 2nd district, because yes, there's more Hispanics in Illinois, but if you all don't live in a contiguous area, it doesn't work when you do congressional maps. It works great for a city ward map or whatever. He wasn't ready to concede the point that you couldn't create a 2nd Hispanic district. Do you see in your analysis, in your reported analysis? And I'm glad you brought that up, because everyone who's listening, David is extraordinary. He's in a field of one in his redistricting reporting, and the maps I'm talking about are the way he expresses his reporting, where I'm using words when I write and we're using video to talk. He also expresses it in his cartography. But do you see a way for a 2nd Hispanic district in Illinois?
It depends on your definition of majority, because traditionally the Voting Rights Act has prioritized what's called CVAP, citizen voting age population. It is absolutely possible to create 2 districts where Hispanics are a majority of residents. But when it comes to actual eligible voters, that becomes very dicey. My estimates, and this is still very tricky to calculate because the census does not ask about citizenship, but based on my estimates, it would be just shy of what's required to draw 2 districts with Hispanic citizen voting age population above 50%. That could end up being Democrats' justification for keeping the 4th district in its current configuration. Although certainly there are a lot of Hispanic advocates and legislators who would prefer additional opportunities.
Right. And Rachel, so here's in a sense the connection. If you have more Hispanic legislative districts or Hispanics are more powerful in Springfield, then they have more thumbs on the scale. So this is a very interesting dynamic since they are the ones who draw the map, even though, and they have options. So I don't see how, given everything else Democrats have to do, that creating a second Hispanic district would be a priority. But David, you now make me realize you still could do a district that would make it easier to yield a Hispanic. Not every district, by the way, no matter how it's drawn, guarantees who wins. One of the reasons people give an enormous amount of credit to Congresswoman Lauren Underwood is that she is one of the few Black members of Congress who was able to win in a district that was majority white. Speaking of Congresswoman Underwood, she is now the most endangered Democrat. It looks like in your reported map that she gets a great benefit in a new map because it gets rid of almost all her deep Republican territory, especially, her district stretches to the Wisconsin border, and it gets rid of McHenry County, which is one of the, even though Crystal Lake is there, that has Democratic voters, it does get rid of a lot of Republican territory and gives her some other areas where there's actually even more African-American voters.
That's right.
What do you think?
If Democrats pass the map they want to pass, Lauren Underwood's going to hit the jackpot. Her current district voted for Joe Biden by between 2 and 3 points. If Joliet and Bolingbrook are added to her district and McHenry and Lake counties are removed from the 14th district, then Biden's margin would expand to 14 points. So she would be utterly safe for a decade. That wouldn't even fall to Republicans in a wave election. And the question then would be, where does Bill Foster go? Bill Foster actually doesn't have a ton of friends in Springfield, at least not compared to a lot of other incumbent Democrats. And so the map makers could be content to push Foster all the way out into the Rockford area, even though his district would still be pretty reliably blue.
Right. So Rachel, in Springfield, there's been so much focus that you've been writing about on the legislative redistricting, House and Senate in the Illinois General Assembly. Has any attention focused yet on redrawing the congressional maps? And if not, what do you think is going to happen?
Not yet. The census data that came out last week will likely cause Democrats, especially Democrats, but also Republicans, to come back to the legislature soon to potentially make amendments to that map. I believe that they might take up the congressional maps later on in the year. I believe that there's been already some murmurs around who might be moved where, who might be completely erased from a seat. That will obviously have political ramifications for next year. The primary has been pushed back a bit. That gives people a little bit of time to decide whether or not they want to jump into this race or that race. But decisions are going to have to be made. This map is going to have to be drawn. We just don't know yet what the lines, what the boundaries will look like.
So you were at Springfield. Let me just spit out my question, Laura, then we'll get there. And we just finished Republican and Democratic days. It looks like from your reporting, we have 5 Illinois House members. 4 of them were there. The one who was absent was Adam Kinzinger. So I know in some of the reporting David Wasserman has done, it seems his district would be consumed by others. Was there any talk about Kinzinger's fate or his absence when you were there?
No, not specifically. I didn't see him there. He didn't speak, although the state GOP, their decision to not allow some candidates to speak was entirely party-based. But no talk specifically about Kinzinger, more so about we need to fire Pritzker, we need to reclaim these offices that, have once been held by Republicans. We can once more be in power. It was mostly just a rallying of Republicans and patting each other on the back and trying to, get support and candidates for next year.
Yeah, they don't even, and Laura, before I talk, Laura, I think you had a question.
No, it was related to the question you just asked, Lynn. So who are, and I want this for both Rachel and David, who are the most vulnerable Republican congressional seats right now? Rachel, you were saying there's talk about eliminating seats. Obviously, the seat that would be eliminated would be a Republican seat. So what are you both hearing, Rachel? What conversations were you hearing, particularly among Democrats, about the plan going forward in terms of who's most likely to? Some districts might be combined. Maybe there's some talk about obliterating Kinzinger's seat. But what are you hearing, Rachel, and then David?
Representative Rodney Davis was here today in Springfield for Republican Day. He said that his, political future is largely dependent on what the "quote unquote" corrupt Democrats decide to do with his district. There has been some talk about eliminating it or combining him with someone else and potentially putting him into a potentially challenging primary. So I think that's one to watch. Obviously, Representative Kinzinger is one to watch too. He has not made any friends, I believe, with Republicans in terms of, his outspokenness when it comes to former President Trump. Those are the main two that come to mind for me. And then, obviously legislatively or for state legislative districts, there are a couple of others, some firebrands within the House and the Senate who may be either combined or whose districts may be remapped, redrawn in such a way that they no longer have a political future.
Wow. David, what do you think?
Well, the irony is that the two Republicans at huge risk here are the Republicans that Democrats like the most. This is a raw political calculation to maximize the number of Democratic seats. In the maps that I've heard about and published on Twitter, Rodney Davis, who lives in Taylorville, his house would be put into Mary Miller's district, and his district would stretch from East St. Louis all the way to Champaign and become a Biden plus 17 seat. And then when you look at Adam Kinzinger, his district is ripe for elimination for two reasons. Number one, it's situated right between Chicagoland and downstate, right? So it is this buffer zone that can easily be dismantled into other districts. But number two, Democrats figure that they're not eliminating Kinzinger so much as they're eliminating a Trump Republican who would beat him in a primary, like Catalina Laws.
That is such a good point. I want to underscore that no matter where Kinzinger goes, he is going to have, even if the Democrats felt like doing him a favor and saying, whatever you want, Adam, we'll draw you the district, he is going to have a Trump challenge in his primary. President Trump will be, if he does what he has done in the past, will likely intervene because he is one of the people who has been the most outspoken critics of Trump. And so in a way, so I think, David, you're making a point. He can't be saved by Democratic map makers. I mean, that is the irony here then, right?
Which means he has to be, how do I put this politely? But, he has to be shed from the delegation.
Or else, unless he decided to go, if he and Davis, though, if they ran against each other, that would be more of a, well, then maybe you have a Trump person come in and divide that.
What I was going to ask, what about the calculus, the political calculus looking forward? If you do eliminate some of these folks, you create a problem in another place, in the sense that an Adam Kinzinger or Rodney Davis might run for higher office. They might one of them might challenge the governor. One of them might or run in the gubernatorial primary. One of them might run against try to challenge Tammy Duckworth. Are you creating another problem by eliminating an enemy? And how much does that play a role, you think, David, in their calculus?
Well, look, that might be a second order problem because Democrats' first priority is to prevent the House from going Republican, the U.S. House. And so look, the fact that Pritzker has unlimited resources to spend could embolden Democrats to go for more with the congressional map. And the fact that Illinois is a bluer state than it was 10 years ago also alters Democrats' thinking.
We know you have a good point. So today, I guess, as Rachel is saying, Rodney Davis is saying to Democrats, well, if you mess with me and draw a district that I will have difficulty running and winning in, then I'll run for governor, which leads me to think if it would still be a district with a lot of Republican potential, no matter what. If he can't win a district where he's known, how would he think he could run for governor and win in an area where there's a lot more unfriendly turf? So I'm thinking that one through right now. But I guess the threat is out there. And Rachel, in your story that you have today about today's events, you made the point that Republicans would like to win back state offices, but they have no big candidates. Is that going to change, do you think?
Is that going to change, you said?
Yeah, will anyone emerge who is a blue chip name, who Republicans can get around?
I think right now the party is trying to find those blue chip names and see if they will be willing to run for some of these top offices. And I think that those people are right now watching, maybe biting their nails, kind of watching and waiting to see what happens with the congressional remap, with the legislative remap here just in the state, to decide what their next political moves are going to be. While I've been here, I've talked to people on both sides of the aisle, and everybody tells me that they're exploring things or they're talking to people. And I think right now, especially for the Republicans in Illinois, the goal is to find someone who has the deep pockets that you need, especially at the governor level, the gubernatorial level, to fight Pritzker. You need some amount of name recognition, you need some track record to run on, but you also really need that money. And so I think that is going to finding someone who can do all three of those things, or who has all three of those things, will be key to seeing whether or not we see a bigger name on the ticket.
And on the money front, that name might be Ken Griffin, right? There's a lot of conversation around who would Ken Griffin, the very wealthy financier who also supported Bruce Rauner and other candidates in the past. What are they saying? What are you hearing about that, his role in all this?
The head of the Illinois Republican Party said today that he, has talked to big donors. He's, 200 calls behind or so, but he's trying to shore up support. He's trying to figure out who will support candidates, who wants to run, where can they put them. I think right now, all eyes are on Ken Griffin to see if he will come up with a candidate himself, if he, will kind of appoint somebody or tap somebody and tell them, hey, I want you to run against Pritzker and I will support you. But all of that remains to be seen. I think a lot of people are saying it's too early right now to really expect the Ken Griffins of the world to come out with their, checkbooks and writing $2 million, $3 million checks or more. Obviously.
A lot more than also since our primaries moved back to June, it's different. David, to answer, Laura raised a good question. Endangered congressional Democrats. Part of me at first blush would say, well, freshman Mary Miller. But maybe not as endangered as I think. Mary Miller is probably the most Trump-allied member of the delegation. She had Georgia Congressman Taylor Greene come out and do a fundraiser for her. She's aligned herself with the most Trump elements of the party. So in your analysis, does that make her, she's going to be thrown in a primary with either Mike Buss, Darren LaHood, or Rodney Davis. Do you think her being the most strident Trump member of the Illinois delegation makes her more vulnerable or less vulnerable to defeat?
Less vulnerable. I actually think she's totally fine. She represents the viewpoints of her district. This is a district that by the time redistricting is done, could have voted for Trump by more than 40 points. Democrats just, carve out a Republican vote sink that excludes Decatur and Champaign, but includes all the other adjacent areas of downstate. Look, I don't think that Rodney Davis would even bother running against her in a primary because it would be a fool's errand. Rodney Davis's ideal district is a competitive seat where he's the only Republican who stands a chance to win. That competitive seat might not exist after this redistricting round. But
what about running against Darren LaHood? They're two people who have been co-chairs of the Trump campaign in Illinois. They are not critics of the president.
Mary Miller versus LaHood?
No. What if David says, I'll just go run against LaHood because they're two like-minded people in a sense. And then you get rid of the extreme Trump factor. I know we're speculating now. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I don't think the geography really works for that to happen. You'd be talking about Darren LaHood, who is essentially a Peoria area candidate, and Rodney Davis comes from southeast of Springfield. Democrats want to draw essentially a walking stick between East St. Louis and Champaign that would bisect their home bases. So I don't think there would be a district or a scenario in which they would run against one another. And by the way, I think they have a lot in common ideologically. But the most common question that I get is, can Democrats really pass maps these ugly? And my answer is, have you seen what Illinois' congressional map looked like in the 2000s when there was a district that was literally nicknamed the rabbit on a skateboard?
I'm trying to remember which one that was. I'm forgetting. Which one was that, David?
That was the Lane Evans district, Illinois
yeah.
17.
Northwest Illinois, yes.
It meandered all the way, I believe, to Springfield.
So isn't it an irony that former President Barack Obama and his former Attorney General, Eric Holder, have devoted 2 years to complaining and campaigning against the Republicans' gerrymandering and redistricting? Yet I have not heard them complain about Illinois. Have you?
I have not. And by the way, I think the biggest redistricting weapon for either party in the country is actually New York. If you think Democrats are going to be aggressive in Illinois, Democrats could purge 5 of the 8 Republican districts in New York State.
Well,
I haven't seen that written about in the New York Times, but that's under consideration right now.
Now, does it matter if they have a new governor or not? I'm not familiar with how they do things up there.
Well, keep in mind that Kathy Hochul used to be a member of Congress from Western New York, and she might have a vested interest in increasing the number of Democrats in upstate New York. And so she might be all too happy to sign a map there.
So
that's the lieutenant governor who's going to be taking foremost place.
As we're winding down, Rachel, now I have an interesting thought. David has the point that Illinois and New York are crucial if the Democrats are to hold the House of Representatives. But do you think the Springfield Democrats who will make the map will care about that in the way that maybe seems to make sense to me at the moment, and they will have some parochial interests overrun the process and not make a map that maximizes the ability of Democrats to win? Do you think they'll care?
About Congress? Yeah, I think so. I think that the Democrats here are definitely, they're not solely focused on themselves. They've completed their maps, and now it's time to figure out the congressional part of things. And I think that they're going to be thinking about the best way to capitalize on these districts, the best way to redraw these districts to make sure that, they can have Democratic strongholds for decades to come.
And with that, our final word. I want to thank all our guests in the first segment, Congressman Chuy Garcia, Rachel Hinton, the Sun-Times political reporter, and the Cook Political Report's David Wasserman, the national expert on redistricting. Thank you for joining us